Welcome back in. Today we are on to week 11 waiver wire. Thankfully, we didn't have a ton of injuries again this week. So that is a good thing. But we do have two teams on bye this week. Only the Colts and Saints, only two teams. So that is also good news with all the byes we've had recently. But let's go ahead and get right to it. We're going to start with the quarterback position and some of our top ads of the week at the quarterback position. And we are going to start with Joe Flacco. Since coming over to Cincy, Flacco has posted 3 straight games of 24 or more fantasy points. He's averaging 313 passing yards, 2.75 touchdowns, and 25.5 fantasy points in the 4 games he started with the Bengals. Fresh off their bye, the Bengals traveled to Pittsburgh to take on a Steelers pass defense that is allowing 299 passing yards and 1.75 touchdowns per game to quarterbacks. Flacco will be a top 15 quarterback play again this week. Next up, let's move over to Aaron Rodgers. The nearly 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers has 18 passing touchdowns, which ranks third highest heading into week 10. Next up for the Steelers is a home matchup against a Bengals defense that has allowed the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks. I think Rodgers is a little bit more of just a safer play due to his touchdown upside. However, he does carry a little bit lower of a ceiling as the Steelers really just want to run the ball. So I do want to mention that. So Aaron Rodgers, I think, is in play because of the matchup against the Bengals. But I think he's not as high as I'm not as high on him as some others that are going to be on this list. Next up, let's talk about Jacoby Brissett. Brissett continues to be a fantasy goldmine, even though the Cardinals got belt today. He completed 22 of 44 passes for 258 yards and 2 scores. He also rushed 4 times for 31 yards and converted a 2-point conversion for 19.5 fantasy points. Since taking over at quarterback, he has scored 19 or more fantasy points in every single game. Next up for Brissett and the Cardinals are a solid matchup against the 49ers, who have allowed the 11th most PPR points to quarterbacks. And then after this week, they get another really good matchup as well against the Jags, who have also allowed the 4th most PPR points to quarterbacks. So I think he is set up nicely over the next couple of weeks to be somebody that you can plug into your lineups if you're in need of a quarterback. Next up is going to be Marcus Mariota. Mariota and the Commanders got hammered at home against the Lions, losing 44-22. However, Mariota had a decent fantasy day, completing 16 of 22 for 213 yards and 2 scores. He also rushed 5 times for 22 yards for 19 fantasy points. Now heading into week 11, the Commanders will travel to Miami and face a defense that has allowed the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And then lastly, this does feel a little bit gross, but Geno Smith, after that abysmal performance against the Broncos on Thursday Night Football. However, I should say prior to that game, Geno did light up a struggling Jags defense for 284 yards and 4 touchdowns for 27 fantasy points. After the Raiders mini bye, they will get a phenomenal matchup against the Cowboys defense that has allowed the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. So if you're really desperate, Geno Smith, I do think, is in play. Let's keep it moving. Let's move over to the running back position. And we are going to start with Tyler Algier. Again, I feel like this is Groundhog's Day because I feel like I talk about him every single video I do here. But either way, I've mentioned Algier, like I said, 3 or 4 straight weeks, and his ownership has stayed relatively flat. Now today against the Colts, Algier rushed 11 times for 57 yards and 2 touchdowns for 18 fantasy points. This is not a one-off thing for Algier either, who has scored 10-plus fantasy points in 5 of 9 games. Now, he does tend to be a bit more game script dependent, but the Falcons tend to lean on him, and especially inside the red zone. In fact, Tyler Algier actually has 5 carries inside the 10-yard line to just 1 for Bijan Robinson over the last 4 weeks. Bijan hasn't scored a rushing touchdown since week 6. Next up for the Falcons are matchups against the Panthers, Saints, the Panthers and Saints, and some other good matchups. Algier possesses standalone value, but he also offers league-winning upside if something were to happen to Bijan. Let's move over to Amari DiMercato, only rostered in 37% of leagues. Bam Knight left with what is being described as an ankle injury. DiMercato ended up finishing the game and ended up with 104 total yards on 7 touches. Now, it should be mentioned that Trey Benson could be back this week as he's now eligible to return from IR. But if he does it and not misses time, DiMercato could be in line for a much bigger workload. We'll have to monitor the situation. But either way, he's going to have a role, whether Knight plays or if Trey Benson is back. I do think DiMercato is going to continue to be the third down back and the pass catching back, as well as the 2-minute back here within this offense. So he's definitely worthy of an ad in all 12-team leagues. Now, let's talk about some handcuff plus type plays. Devin Singletary's first up, only rostered in 25% of leagues. Singletary rushed 8 times for 20 yards and caught all 3 of his targets for 53 yards for 10 PPR points. A week after Singletary looked like he was the lead back, the pendulum swung back to Tracy, who outtouched Singletary 15-12. But more notably, Tracy played 67% of the snaps to just 26% for Singletary. Singletary certainly doesn't possess a huge ceiling, but should continue to be a useful flex option depending on the matchup, as he's been used more as a pass catcher and on third downs. Next up is going to be Blake Corum. Corum continues to eat into Kyron Williams' workload. Uh, Today or over the last 3 weeks, Corum has averaged 12 carries per game and has 50 or more yards in each of the last two. The hard part about using him as a flex, though, is the lack of usage in the passing game, which makes him touchdown dependent. But the issue there is he only has one touchdown all year. Overall, Corum does offer some flex appeal. It would be the workhorse if Kyron ever got banged up and were forced to miss time. Either way, Corum should still be rostered in all 12-team leagues. 11% rostered is just laughable. Next up is going to be Devin Neal. Rookie running back Devin Neal rushed 4 times for 22 yards and it was targeted 3 times for 9 yards. Nothing special, but it is worth a bench stash, even with the Saints going on bye. After the Saints bye, they get favorable running back schedule with matchups against the Falcons, Dolphins, Bucks, Panthers, Jets, and Titans. So I do think Devin Neal is worthy of a stash. Now, let's keep it moving. Let's move over to the wide receiver position. And this group feels very similar to last week because most of these guys are still rostered in less than 50% of leagues, and all of them did really well, and all of them were featured in last week's. So first is going to be Parker Washington, caught 3 of 7 targets for 33 yards and a touchdown. He also returned a punt for a 72-yard score as well. He finished with 18 PPR points. The 7 targets led the team, which was encouraging, but Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter were absent. It will be interesting to see how things will change for Washington once Brian Thomas returns and the addition of Jacoby Myers. I would expect Washington likely to continue to operate as a slot wide receiver, and that is a role that has earned him 26 targets over the last 3 games. So I do think Parker Washington is very viable flex option moving forward. Next up is going to be Alec Pierce. Pierce had his best game of the year this morning in Germany. He hauled in 4 of 7 targets for 84 yards and a score for 18 PPR points against the Falcons. Pierce has now scored 12 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games and has averaged 15 PPR points over that span. Pierce will continue to be a useful wide receiver 3/4 moving forward and is worth a look at 10-team leagues as well, but definitely should be added in all 12-team leagues and above, even with the Week 11 bye coming. Next up, let's move over to Tez Johnson. Johnson brought in 4 or 5 targets for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns for 20 PPR points. He finished third on the team in targets, but now has scored 4 times in as many weeks. It is seeing enough targets to make it a viable flex option moving forward. Next up for the Bucks, they road matchup against the Bills. And then lastly, Darius Slayton rostered in 32% of leagues. Slayton caught all 4 of his passes for 89 yards and for nearly 13 PPR points. He ended up leading the team in receiving yards. But once Jackson Dart exited with a concussion, he pretty much went cold. If Dart isn't cleared this week, it will be hard to trust with Russell Wilson at quarterback against the Packers. But this is more of a long-term ad for me because the Giants have the 4th easiest remaining schedule for wide receivers moving forward. So I think he's definitely going to play a factor once Jackson Dart returns. Now some deeper type plays. First is going to be Jaden Higgins. Higgins put together a solid game with Davis Mills under center. He caught 5 of 7 targets for 42 yards and a touchdown for 15 PPR points. This is Higgins' second time in 3 weeks scoring a touchdown, and has now seen 16 targets over his last 3 games. The rookie wide receiver is starting to put together enough production to be a solid stash. It could be increased opportunities if Christian Kirk continues to struggle. The Texans' remaining schedule offers some solid matchups as well, with matchups against the Titans, Colts, Cardinals, and Raiders upcoming. Higgins deserves to be rostered in 12-team leagues and above. Lastly, I want to mention Kyle Williams. Now, this is another typical day for a Patriots wide receiver. Rookie wide receiver Kyle Williams drew some buzz this past week after Kayshon Boutte was ruled out with an injury. Head coach Mike Vrabel spoke highly of Williams, and now he wanted to get him involved. Well, he caught one of 2 targets, but that one reception he took for a 72-yard touchdown for 14 PPR points. Boutte could be back next week, but maybe Williams gets a little more opportunities moving forward. Overall, I think Williams is not a priority ad in any way, but could be a stash with bye weeks winding down. Now, let's move over to tight ends. At first, we're going to hit on is going to be well. First thing I want to mention is Aranda Gasson left with a knee injury. Now it looks like a possible bone bruise. He knocked knees with the Steelers defender. This will be a situation we're going to need to monitor. He left, went to the locker room, and never came back. So we'll have to see what's going on here. They called it a knee injury, but we'll have to see because I mean a deep bone bruise it ended up costing multiple weeks. But we'll just have to see how this thing looks moving forward, which really sucks because they get a great matchup next week against the Jags. But either way, let's talk about some streaming options here or some players that even can be utilized more long term. First, we're going to talk about is Dalton Schultz, only rostered in 32% of leagues. Schultz earned 11 targets today. He caught 7 of them for 53 yards and a score for 18 PPR points against the Jags. Schultz continues to be a safety valve for this offense, has been targeted 32 times over his last 4 games. He's also averaging 13.8 PPR points over that same span. It's kind of surprising, though, to me. He's only rostered in 32% of leagues, especially with the state of tight end position. Schultz will be a low end tight end 1 or high end tight end 2 on most weeks moving forward. Next is going to be Juwan Johnson, rostered in 47% of leagues. Johnson breakout continues. This week he caught all 4 of his targets for 92 yards and a touchdown for 19 PPR points against the Titans. Johnson should be viewed as a low end tight end 1 moving forward and is worth a stash heading into their week 11 bye. Cade Otton is next up, 39% rostered. Otton hauled in 9-12 targets for 82 yards for 17 PPR points. Otton led the team in receptions and was second on the team in targets and receiving yards behind Emeka Egbuka. Otton has been a very useful tight end in recent weeks due to all of the team injuries to wide receivers. He's now registered 50 receiving yards in 4 of his last 5 games. Otton's, much like Schultz and Johnson, will be the tight end 1 slash high end tight end 2 discussion as long as the volume continues. And then lastly, Steelers tight ends. Every week we're going to be targeting tight ends versus the Bengals. The Bengals are historically bad against the position. They have already allowed 12 touchdowns to tight ends and the most receiving yards to the position. Now, this is a bit trickier considering the Steelers use multiple tight ends, but Jonnu Smith leads the group in routes and targets while Patty Fry is just behind him. I lean Jonnu, but I think both are viable streaming options this week against such a horrible team against tight ends. So this is going to be the flow chart every week when it comes to tight ends. It's just who's playing the Bengals, and that's who we're going to want to try to play for that week. Now, a couple questions we have in here from Tyler: who's the best tight end to replace Gatson if he's out next week? Looks like Otton, Fannin, and Musgrave. For me, it's going to be Otton right now in the matchup against the Bills. He just continually sees a ton of targets right now, so I really like Cade Otton as an option. Musgrave, we haven't seen play yet. Obviously, they play on Monday night, but I just feel better about Cade Otton's situation. I think Dalton Schultz is also there well. Dalton Schultz and the Texans travel to the Titans off their bye. So I have Flacco and JD5. I feel like I'm a quarterback away from going all the way. Do I trade disappointing Sutton for Dart? Is there a worthy they hold them out because their season lost? I mean, I would be shocked if he played this upcoming week. Just players that suffer a concussion. Very rarely do players make it back the same week after suffering that concussion. Now, Cole Kmet is a rare one that he actually came back after suffering a concussion last week and played this week. But for the most part, most of the time, those players tend to miss a week and then they're usually back the week after. So I would expect Dart not to play next week. But I mean, if you could trade Cortland Sutton for Jackson Dart, I'd probably do that if you're good to go at the position because I mean, Jackson Dart is going to continue to be a fantasy landmine or fantasy gold mine. Excuse me. He just continues to play really well despite the weapons they have. Now his ability to run is going to tend to lead to some things like this happening because that's how he got hurt today. He took off, scrambled, and ran, and then he got taken out that way. But that's also the reason we love him as a fantasy asset because he's going to provide that type of opportunity. So it hurts my depth a little. Wide receiver, running back would be Adams, Buka, Golden, Godwin, Hunter, Booty, running back Jitsi, Achan, Henry, Travion Henderson, and Tootin. I mean, you're still going to have Devontae Adams, which I mean, he left with he was questionable to return, but I think he should be okay. But you still have Buka. I mean, I don't love Golden, Godwin. I mean, I think both of those guys can be dropped. Honestly, I don't think Chris Godwin, even if he does return this year, I don't think he's going to be anywhere close to the guy he was prior to the injury. And so I feel like this is just wasting a roster spot. So I think you could actually look to drop Godwin, and I also think you could probably drop Matthew Golden. Maybe hold on to see what he does tomorrow night. But there's just so many wide receivers available in that wide receiver room. And they spread the ball around so much. I just don't see Matthew Golden ever being a viable fantasy producer this year. And honestly, I mean, Jaden Reed's about to be back too. And so, I mean, they just continue to have so many different weapons that I just think Matthew Golden is a drop. And so, I mean, if a lot of these guys are available, I would be fine with doing that. Yes, it would make you pretty thin. I would say, at least for right now, though, when it comes to Joe Flacco, like I think you can at least continue to roll him out there because, like I already talked about the matchup he has this week, but the Bengals' upcoming schedule is pretty solid for quarterbacks. So let's see, just look really quick. Um, Overall, the Bengals have the seventh easiest remaining schedule for quarterbacks. Now, I will say Jackson Dart actually has the easiest remaining schedule for quarterbacks. But I mean, the Bengals get the Steelers, the Patriots, which isn't great, the Ravens, then the Bills, the Ravens again, the Dolphins, and the Cardinals in the fantasy championship week. So there's a lot of pretty solid matchups there. But yeah, I still feel like though if I could do it and if I could flip Cortland Sutton for Jackson Dart, I probably end up doing it. And then I would look to move on from Golden and Godwin and probably add some different wide receivers depending on who's out there. So that's probably the way that I would handle it there, Bryce. Sorry. Anyways, hopefully Gatson will be back next week. Yeah, we'll see. It's a shame because he's playing really well. His day should have been a lot better. He dropped a couple passes, but either way, he has been phenomenal. And just would be a Chargers thing for him to go down, but it's definitely a situation that we're going to have to monitor to see how this plays out. So that being said, appreciate it. Keep it locked in here. We'll be back again on Tuesday morning with our must-add defenses and kickers of the week. And we'll be back again on Wednesday. We'll go live again on Wednesday. Plus, we'll have our top plays at every position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So appreciate all the support. Keep it locked here. Hope everybody got dubs. We'll be back in for week 11. See you on the next one. Bye.